What I'm going to do is show I'll just show one animation. It was made by Fort Nelson First Nations to describe and show in a very quick way the pace and scale of industry activity. Every second is a month. So I take you through about 12 years in a few minutes. I want you to watch this area right here. That's the Horn River Basin. And what I want you to watch and think about is what kind of conflicts would you see if this was your home? And if this is where your grandfather came from and your grandfather's grandfather came from. So here we are, 2005. Hydraulic fracturing, horizontal drilling is getting perfected in the Barnett Shale, and people recognize unconventional energy is a real possibility. 2007, 10 years of getting sold. Notice the exploration. These are seismic. Then 2008 and 2009. And this is to scale. This is OGC data, straight up. This is the size. This map is about 174,000 square kilometers, and that's the center of it. Horn River, right there. And so it goes. No, we're almost there. It's available publicly, actually, on the Common Sense Canadian website, which is why I'm allowed to use it. But again, I want you to think about not only cumulative impact, but just what conflict would look like in that context. What would accommodation and consultation look like if you were from there? And if you're one of those people who like to live off the land, or you're one of those people who remembers a time when that land was relatively pristine. That's what we deal with, and that's what we see. And there's another interesting point here, because I'm in Vancouver. This is the second time I've spoken in this room, and I made this point last time I was here. I don't know how many of you have been to Northeast BC. A number of you, I'm positive, but some perhaps not. I'm not sure how many people knew about this in 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, when the boom was really pushing. I mean, you might have seen some profits. You might have seen some really interesting revenue reports from the provincial government. A couple new buildings, some new infrastructure, decreased price of heating in the wintertime. But that's what it looked like on my side. And that's a base of conflict as well, because the conflict between the hinterland and the heartland, between the rural and the urban, is significant in my work and the work of my people. We've had to actively engage and push and try and make people understand what happened up there, just to have a dialogue, never mind really engage with the issues of the consequences. Okay, there we go. This slide was meant more just to talk about what's happened since. Market value, $9.24 billion in 2008. Since 2005, our core territory, which is territory adjacent to rivers, streams, areas where there's moose lakes, areas known to be important to us, has been sold off and leased, again, without consultation. Although ILMB was kind enough to allow us to put notations on lease sales saying the nation has very significant concerns with this particular parcel because, and there are some cases where they did pull it for a month or two or three and deny the sale for a while to assuage our concerns. Anyway, so I'll try and get through this. These are the areas of conflict that I've seen. Now, I'm not sure how many of you guys remember where these pictures came from. Do you remember this? 2008, 2009? Second round of pipeline bombings in Northeast BC. I had left for law school at the time, so there's no way. Oh, God. I'm going to really start sweating up here. But these are the areas of conflict that we've noticed. This is a summary from multiple slides that both myself and many others from the nation have put forward. And I'll just run through some pictures to show you the examples. But these are the areas and the types of conflicts that really get impacted on the ground and really cause issues with consultation and those kinds of processes and really make it difficult for us to have relationships with the government and with the industry. Linear disturbance, I just want to make a quick point here. Linear disturbance isn't brutal only because it looks like that or it causes things like this that allow for any hunter who doesn't know anything about the land to come in and shoot moose or deer or elk or whatever. Wolves and other predators use these to move quite efficiently. So there's a $1,000 bounty right now on wolves in my territory, put on by my nation, because we've seen wolf packs like we've never seen before, decimating already emaciated moose population, elk population, and caribou in particular. Caribou are way on the decline. And so our nation has stepped up and said we have to get rid of the wolves. And we don't want to, but it's just the nature of what we're facing. Because they can move using these, they can attack different herds very efficiently. And the point with this, aside from the obvious impact, is just that impacts are atypical. Impacts are contingent upon where you come from, and conflict is contingent upon your perspective of what's important. So a linear impact might be, addressed by an oil and gas commission person by, having a dog leg like this. See how it turns? Well, that's so that a hunter can't shoot 800 yards using a 300 Winchester Magnum, for example, and wound a moose because he just happens to have a big Magnum rifle. These are designed so that you can't shoot long distance. So jackasses from the oil patch, for example, who don't know anything about hunting, take long shots and wound animals. Problem is that doesn't really address the fundamental issue, which is that you basically have a highway for wolves throughout your territory. And as you've seen in the maps previous, there's lots of them. The land is forever changed. Just a point about conceptions. Okay, pollution. When I was in Aotearoa, I was apologizing to Maori and Pacifica people because I felt that I had an obligation to them because of the CO2 that comes out of my territory. I'm not sure if you guys share that, but it's just an interesting point. When we think about pollution, there's there's the obvious stuff like produced water, groundwater inflow, hydraulic fracturing, diesel, sand, chemicals, all those things. Oil leaking from these all over God's green earth, but also bigger issues like 200 million tons of carbon dioxide come out of Canada's largest gas plant, which is the Cabin gas plant, built in the heart of the Horn River Basin. So that area that you saw accumulated. Those are other things, and that's a conflict of a different kind. To my mind, and this is something I'll speak to in the end, that's a conflict of humans with the natural world, and that preaches to a need for reconciliation bigger than what is posited in mainstream Aboriginal law. Another point from pollution, this, I'm not sure you guys can see, this is a lined pit, so this is probably produced water, meaning they came back up out of this hole and was put here and will be dealt with one way or the other. This is an artist rendering of Encana's long-term water license withdrawal facility. The point with this slide and the conflict here is that this is the Fort Nelson River. It's one of the central rivers in our territory. We're river people at Chardenne. And a long-term water license which carries a minimum 5-year up to 40-year term for literally millions or billions of gallons raises a lot of concerns in the community, especially because gas pipelines can transport water as well. And we live in an era of climate change, and it's very clear that if you have a commodity and it turns out to be very valuable, you might be like Alcan and sell the power rather than make aluminum because it makes you more money. And we are concerned about things like this because no one builds a multi-million-dollar withdrawal facility in an era of depressed gas prices unless you're going to make a return on their investment. Why would you do that? You've been doing fine with years of short-term water applications year by year, which there's no consultation on, but that's a side issue. Well, it's not a side issue, it's another issue. Why is that being done? And again, so when we think about conflict, I just want you guys to understand that the conflict that I refer to is not only the conflict that is simple and straightforward and appears before us, but it's the conflict about what might come and what the real plan is and what the real implications are of given processes and decisions. That's Damien, actually, in the back of his head. This is taken a couple of years ago. So, whoa, let's get too excited here. There we go. This, H2S, poisonous gas, authorized personnel only. Do not enter. If you're unfortunate enough to have a cabin on this side, if you're unfortunate enough to have a holy place out here, this is a problem. And interference with First Nations and land users is a big issue because in some ways this development allows access, but in other ways it impedes it. And again, if the land is your larder, your church, your place of refuge, what do you do when this shows up all over? Not Damien, he's cool. This is another issue. I mean, the water stuff I can't even begin to go into in a serious way. Water contamination, water loss, water drawdown, water transfer, and water privatization. Because we're speaking about Indigenous law, something I picked up when I was at the Keepers of the Water Conference this year. In my territory, there's talk and prophecies of the hard times when the muskeg will burn, holes will open up in the earth. And I was talking with a guy from north of us. So the Dene is a big homeland of the Dene. We're the southern end of that, southwestern tip. The Dene from north of us, one of them in particular, he was talking to me, he said that, wow, we have the same thing, but us, we talk about a time when snakes will cross the land. And that'll be the time we have to watch the water. Now, I'm not sure what they saw in their dreams, but you can see how that would remind somebody of that. And I'm not saying you have to believe it. I'm not saying you have to trust me or anything. You don't have to adopt my position or my perspective or my history or my beliefs. But I think it's interesting we conceptualize conflict in that way. Because conflict can come from older things. And things that might appear to be nonsensical can have very significant impact on the people, and the elders in particular, and as a consequence on the young people who follow their elders very closely. Earthquakes, self-explanatory. I don't want to get into that. But, well, you laugh now, just you wait. I would like you guys to read this. This is the affidavit of my grandmother, Catherine Doki. And what she's talking about is not only the physical impact of the loss of a species on our land, but what that means for the culture. She can't transfer the knowledge and wisdom embedded in those things if they no longer exist. And again, in the spirit of sharing, I'll share something with you. The story I was told when we talked about this is that Grandma McLean, had esophageal cancer, cancer of the throat, I believe. And she asked the hunters to go bring her a caribou unskinned, unopened, which is very rare. You'd never do that. You'd always sort it out in the bush, take it apart, bring it in. And when you skin an animal, there's a membrane against the hide between, so you take the flesh and there's the hide, and then you have to scrape that membrane off, and then you've got the hide clean. You can go further in your production. What she did is she scraped the membrane from the inside of the hide out of the neck piece and used that to make medicine out of this caribou for herself, for her cancer. And can you imagine what the loss of the caribou means when that's the kind of thing embedded within them literally? Now that elder is long, long since passed on, but that's the kind of thing that's carried here. So again, when you think about conflict, it's not just medicine and culture and all these things, it's actually the very memories of our people. And yeah, it makes me sad to say, because I know that to find that stuff is very difficult now because those people are gone. Heavy heart type stuff. This is not heavy heart, this is just crazy. Whoa, hold on there. This is a picture I took in 2007. ConocoPhillips had an incident near Tumbler Ridge. And it's something you don't see a lot of, but there's a lot of issues that come out of this, a lot of conflicts of interest. Another issue, two of my late cousins both died very young. The point with this slide is, one, to honor them and honor their memory, but also point out that even if there's no directly attributable deaths as a consequence of this industry, a rich community can be very dangerous. If you were given a dirt bike at a young age, if you drove a long way, tired, because you got paid, because your dad had a lot of money, there's a risk, there's danger. And this speaks to a different kind of conflict as well. This isn't just, I hope it's clear, this isn't just conflict between the Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. Can you imagine the conflict between the father and mother after this child passes on? And the conflict in the family, my cousins who passed? The conflict that we speak of and the conflict I'm trying to address, the application of our Indigenous laws and of our traditions, is a conflict embedded everywhere as a consequence of these developments. And that's the nature of life. I don't pretend that everything is evil about the industry. But again, we conceptualize of it as way bigger and way more complex than what is often understood. And that's what I was hoping to convey with this slide as I honor my cousin's memory. Both died way too young. Another point, environmental injustice. If you are unfortunate enough to be from Doig, in the talk I gave at UBC Law this afternoon, one guy was, you live within 15 kilometers, and this is from 2007, of an active operating well. And the play in this area is actually mostly sour gas. So you live within 15 kilometers of 351 to 400 active wells. And Doig River Indian Reserve School could be an issue. If you go to school out here like I did when I was a kid, 551 to 600 operating wells, I only went there for like 1 year. It's a different environment. You don't see this in Victoria, you don't see this in Vancouver, but you sure as hell see it in the rural, on the edges, typically Indigenous. And that's another kind of conflict that I have a very deep issue with, on a personal level and from a more theoretical justice level. Sorry, that slide was taken from the public health study undertaken by the Northern Health Officer in 2007. Now, what I've tried to do is just distill and think about what's the commonalities through all these various places and spaces of conflict. What is it? And I do open it up to you. At the end we're going to talk, I hope, if I speak fast enough, about what you've seen and some thoughts on it. I would like you guys to think about what the commonalities are, because these are the ones that I saw. Uncertainty. When I say uncertainty, I don't just mean like uncertainty for business. I mean scientific uncertainty. uncertainty of long-term consequence, uncertainty of the implications of this, uncertainty of what it's going to do to the gas prices domestically, because now gas is super cheap because it's everywhere. What about the uncertainty of polluting an aquifer that has a recharge rate of 20,000 years and no one's maps? We don't know actually where it's going to go. There is uncertainty of every kind, especially as climate change really comes home. And so when we talk about conflict, one of our issues is that the true uncertainty and scope and scale of this development isn't really understood, never mind engaged with by the regulatory process. And I have a theory that Indigenous laws might step in to fill that gap because we're very cautious people in many ways. Consultation, that'll get me into trouble, that little point. Cumulative impacts, I pointed that out earlier. Regulatory capture. I'm actually waiting for the day that Alex Ferguson is in the room when I talk about this. Is he here? No? Okay, so I hope someday you should be. Regulatory capture, do people know what that means? Regulatory capture, you heard of that? Some of you do, I'm positive. Just the capture of a regulatory agency by the industry that it seeks to regulate for the purposes of improving and facilitating and streamlining that regulatory agency's activities, essentially. Now, Alex Ferguson, 2 years ago now, a year and a half, was the former commissioner for all of us as British Columbians. He was the commissioner of the Oil and Gas Commission. Now, he quit and 3 days later hired on with Apache Corps Canada. Now, I'm not saying that's regulatory capture necessarily, but it looks like regulatory capture, and he's by no means the only high-ranking executive from an Indigenous government or the provincial government or the federal government to be taken and hired. That's the prerogative of people. They have to pay their families. I respect that. I don't have an issue with people working for industry. But what does that mean for the regulatory ability, for the agency, for the ability to meaningfully engage with these questions of how we develop when that kind of thing happens on an ongoing basis? It's a point that I think we have to address. Another issue, and it's related, is the credibility gaps. And on this, I just want to make this point. Credibility issues are not unique to Indigenous, non-Indigenous state relations. They're not unique to the provincial government. There's credibility gaps everywhere, and that includes among my own people. Straight up. That's everybody. Even myself. I've never worked directly for industry, but in many ways I've worked for industry as well, even if it's in opposition. And so what does credibility look like in that world? Because the industry permeates the existence up there. And for those of you who've been up there, you'll understand. What does credibility look like in a world like that? And you see, market value $9.24 billion in 2008, and it's gotten bigger since. What could be credible up there when those kinds of figures and values are flying around? And then atomistic. And by this I mean, the only reason I chose that word is because I couldn't find an appropriate antonym for holistic. It is the processes of assessment are, generally speaking, project-specific or industry-specific. They are anthropocentric, generally speaking, even though there is some consideration of impacts to animals and those kinds of things. And to my mind, the commonality of these various ways of conflicts occurring, it primarily results from the fact that they're focused upon minute aspects, facets, blinkered views of certain things. And I find that to be very difficult because the Indigenous traditions that I come from and that really inspire me reject that hypothesis because it's self-evident that it's not true. It's utterly discredited by lived experience. Go spend a day on the land and you recognize that making a fire is related to the growth of the trees, which is related to the water, which is related to the animals, which the world is connected. It always has been. Every breath we take, that becomes true. It's clear to us, and yet for some reason, it's just one application. It's just one lease sale. It's just one seismic activity. And that's an interesting thing. And then, of course, environmental injustice. This is the other side of it. This is Lakota and Wet'suwet'en unite to fight. And this is the response. This is what's coming, more and more. Now, how do we respond to it? And I'll try and get through this part with the utmost respect, but as quickly as I can. This is taken from John Borrow's work, and the relevant point with this primarily, I believe we live in a legally pluralistic state. For the lawyers in the room, I'm not going to go into too much of the theory stuff, but essentially multiple legal orders existing in the same space. Very simple concept. Civil law, common law, Indigenous law. The point that's really important for me is this. What happens? Where is it applied? Now, if you take one thing away from this, aside from my awesome hair tonight, it's that there is space in the conflicts that I've just showed you for recognition of an issue, recognition of a need for an answer, resources because of the massive profitability, the massive scientific potential of these processes, the massive wisdom of both Western and non-Western thinkers looking at these issues, and the question of jurisdiction deriving primarily from Indigenous peoples' presence on the land before the colonizer. I think you have all of these requirements potentially in unconventional energy. That's the very simple thesis. And for those of you guys who knew me back in the day, that was the thesis I had when I was working for West Moberly. It's a simple point that we can actually deal with this because the kind of fights we're seeing require this. Recognize there's an issue, recognize that there might be a solution, pull some of the resources being wasted litigating and fighting and scrapping in courts, which is good for the lawyers, but might not be so good for long-term sustainable solutions, well, in some ways, and just grant some jurisdiction. That's all that's required for a different legal order to manifest and at least try to fix something. What might that look like? Now, there's lots of things I could talk about, UN DRIP, a million examples of Indigenous laws coming forward, UVIC's program, the Akitsarak, the work of people in this room. This is one thing I wanted to share. This was done, I think, about 11 days ago. Yeah. This is, Aboriginal Law Section. This is big stuff. CBA, Canadian Bar Association, put this forward, and it was moved. This is our profession, for those of us involved in the legal profession in this room, stepping up to the plate and recognizing that we really have to move forward. Some people in this room are very, very actively involved in this, and that's one of the reasons I put it up here. I wanted to honor that. This is an example of these laws coming forward. So we're getting the recognition. We're moving forward. Now, reconciliation. One of the often posited rules and ideas about Indigenous laws and the use of Indigenous laws for Indigenous people is reconciliation. I have a problem with that. This is where me and a lot of people differ, because I don't really believe in reconciliation as preached by the courts. Despite the fact that I'm Treaty 8 and that I'm compelled to live in peace and friendship with the colonizer, I don't buy reconciliation between two cultures. That's not the reconciliation I think was embedded in the law and in our treaties. Because a reconciliation built upon human-to-human relationships is innately myopic and emaciated. It doesn't include everything that's relevant. It's good. It puts to bed some pretty serious and deep, dark, divisive issues that have torn apart this country and blackened our names collectively. But it's not the reconciliation we need for the kind of conflicts I've shared with you tonight. I think reconciliation means something bigger, and I would like to deploy Indigenous legal principles to achieve a bigger reconciliation, the reconciliation between my people and the colonizers. I would like that to be dealt with. Don't get me wrong, that'd be lovely. Sort that shit out. But, but that's, oh God, I'm swearing. But that's not the beauty and the wisdom of what was put in the treaties. It wasn't reconciliation between the colonizer and the colonized. It was reconciliation between peoples and the land and all that sustained them. That's what I think the beautiful possibility is. Now, why? Because we get past this anthropocentric construction. And anthropocentric constructions, notions that we are somehow at the top of the food chain, are ridiculous. And again, in the face of lived experience if you spend time out in the land. 2, you respond to uncertainty. In Northeast BC and in unconventional energy development in particular, you see a lot of contamination. You see uncertainty around contamination. You see uncertainty with the business, and of course, that's why you lock down long-term water licenses because of climate change. You don't know if you're going to have water to frack in 20 years, so you lock it down now because it's a first in time, first in right water allocation system. And community conflict as a result. These uncertainties, we don't know what's going to happen here, require this bigger, deeper notion of reconciliation to my mind. And my point is that if this kind of reconciliation were to occur, both inter and intra-community reconnections would be created. Even in the Indigenous community, the line between those who advocate for contracting opportunities and development and sustainable development versus those who are very traditional and say, absolutely not, just get off the land, we want our land back. I think there's still space for those people to come together and for those collectives to come together with the larger collectives that we all share. As was famously said, we're all here to stay. Now, I don't believe that, Our survival was never guaranteed. It's always been contingent on the land. That's the nature of being human. That's the nature of being a living thing in this place and time and living on this earth. We have a contingent existence. We don't have a right to it. We have responsibility to try and give it to our kids in the best situation and condition as we can. And so I think this is required. And the base point, I'm not sure if you guys can see, I'm kind of in your way, is that I like the precautionary approach and active adaptive management systems because they attempt to engage with these questions of uncertainty. And I'm not sure how many people in the room know what this is. You guys seen this before? Does anyone know what that is? There might be a few. No? Okay. It's a really interesting little series of graphs. This is population from the 1350s. This is water use in kilometers per year globally since 1900. This is paper consumption since 1900. This is fertilizer consumption since 1950. Damming of major rivers since 1850. Atmospheric ambient CO2 concentration since 1350. We're up above 360 at this point. Atmospheric ozone depletion since 1960. Now all of these graphs look the same, and I think there's a big implication there. And that's the other reason why I think we need this kind of reconciliation, especially in the Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin, because it's the second largest hydrocarbon deposit on Earth, because we are global players. And if we solve this problem, we become global players in creating a global solution, at least parts of it. And I think that's a beautiful thing. That's a reconciliation I can get behind.